The sand on Iwo Jima was black and loose, like ground-up rock, and it swallowed boots with every step. Jack Lucas moved with his squad across a rough stretch of slope under a sky that never felt quiet. Even when the shooting paused, the island hummed with it. Distant machine gun bursts, the deep crack of rifles, the thud of mortars landing somewhere out of sight. He was 17 years old, barely old enough to shave, a Marine in a place that did not care how old anyone was. Lucas had wanted into the fight so badly, he'd lied about his age to enlist. Born in Plymouth, North Carolina, he talked his way past the rules, shipped out, trained, and ended up in the Pacific as the war reached its bloodiest stretch. By the time he hit Iwo Jima, the romance was gone. The island was a furnace of rock and sand, dug through with caves and bunkers. The Japanese defenders were hidden underground, letting Marines advance into open lanes of fire, then cutting them down. Cover was scarce, and when men found a shallow depression or a shell hole, they packed into it because there was nowhere else to go. On February 20th, 1945, 3 days after the landings began, Lucas was moving with men from his unit when they came upon a spot that looked like a brief chance to breathe. A small crater and a deeper shell hole that could shelter several Marines from fire sweeping the open sand. The group bunched up, trying to get low. They were close enough together that one piece of bad luck could hit all of them at once. Lucas saw it in the fraction of a second before anyone could react. A Japanese grenade landed among the Marines. Almost immediately, a second grenade followed. They were close, too close to throw back safely, too close for anyone to scramble away in time. In that instant, the men around him froze in the gap between hearing the metal strike and understanding what it meant. Lucas didn't shout. He didn't hesitate long enough for his mind to search for a plan that would save everyone. He dove into the hole where the grenades had landed, pulled one grenade in tight against his chest, and threw his body over both devices, pressing down with his arms and torso as if he could smother the blast with sheer weight. The first explosion hit like a hammer from inside the earth. The shock wave slammed into his ribs and abdomen, driving air out of him and tearing through his uniform. The second blast followed, compounding the damage at the same instant his body was already failing. Hot fragments ripped into him. Shrapnel tore through flesh and muscle. The hole filled with dust and smoke and the sharp chemical bite of explosives. The Marines around him were thrown back and stunned, but they were alive. When the smoke cleared, they realized what Lucas had done and that he was still moving. He was trying to breathe through injuries that should have ended him. His legs were shredded. His torso was torn open in multiple places. Blood soaked the black sand beneath him and ran into the crater's edges. Corpsmen got to him under fire. They worked in a crouch, exposed, doing what they could while the battle continued around them. They packed wounds, tightened bandages, and fought to slow the bleeding. Lucas drifted in and out, his eyes opening briefly, then rolling shut again as shock tried to pull him under. The men who had just been saved helped drag him to a safer spot, then to a collection point where the wounded were gathered for evacuation. Getting him off the island was its own ordeal. Every move jolted damaged tissue and drove pain through his body. He was loaded onto a stretcher and carried across uneven ground while shells and gunfire still cracked overhead. From there, he was moved onto a landing craft and then to a hospital ship, where surgeons worked immediately. His wounds were extensive, and his body was full of metal. Doctors cut away ruined tissue, removed shrapnel where they could, and repaired what they could reach. He received transfusions. Infection was a constant threat. The days after the blasts were a blur of anesthesia, fever, and more surgery. Surviving the explosions was only the beginning. The recovery stretched into weeks and months. His legs required repeated treatment. Scars tightened and pulled. Pain woke him at night. Even after the worst danger passed, he was left with lasting damage that followed him through the rest of his life. Cold weather could reach deep into old injuries. Sitting too long could make his legs seize. Simple movements could flare old wounds like a live wire. On Iwo Jima, everything worked against a wounded man. The sand clung to blood and bandages. Dust coated mouths and eyes. The wind pushed grit into every cut. Corpsmen carried morphine and dressings, but there was never enough time, never enough hands, and never enough shelter. When Lucas was placed in the stream of casualties, he wasn't the only Marine torn apart that day. Around him were men with burns, amputations, and chest wounds who could barely speak. Stretcher bearers moved in short bursts, waiting for lulls, then running again. At one point, Lucas tried to lift his head and couldn't. He tasted dirt and copper. The world narrowed to the pressure of hands holding him still, while someone worked at his clothing with scissors, cutting it away because it was stuck to wounds. He felt the cold sting of antiseptic, then heat as pain surged, then the distant softness as medication began to pull him away from the noise. Even with drugs, the body has its own alarms. He shook uncontrollably as shock set in, teeth chattering, skin going pale, the mind drifting while the heart fought to keep pace. In surgery, survival became a series of blunt decisions. Stop the bleeding, remove what will kill him first, close what can be closed, leave what must be returned to later. The metal fragments were not clean bullets. They were jagged pieces that tore as they traveled. Some could be removed, others could not without doing more damage. When he woke, he was wrapped and immobilized, and the pain was not a single point. It was everywhere at once, deep and sharp, flaring with every breath. News of what he did traveled quickly because the act was so direct. He had thrown himself onto 2 grenades to shield Marines beside him. In August 1945, President Harry S. Truman presented him the Medal of Honor. Lucas was still a teenager when he received it, one of the youngest Marines to earn the award. The ceremony was formal, but the reality behind it was a scarred, wounded young man standing in front of the nation with a body that had been torn apart on a volcanic island. When he returned home, the medal made him famous, but fame didn't repair nerves, muscle, or scar tissue. Rehabilitation was exhausting and private, full of exercises that hurt and progress that came in inches. People wanted the clean version of the story, the moment of heroism frozen in time. Lucas lived the messy version: medical appointments, lingering pain, and the knowledge that his survival depended on luck, fast corpsmen, and surgeons who refused to let him die. Over the years, he tried to build an ordinary life around extraordinary damage. He married, worked, and struggled in ways that didn't fit into a citation. Eventually, he returned to service, later joining the U.S. Army and serving during the Korean War, reaching the rank of captain. For him, that was another kind of proof. The grenades had not ended his ability to endure, even if they had marked him permanently. Jacqueline H. Lucas died in 2008. The Medal of Honor citation captured the facts, but the true weight of the story was in what followed: the long, brutal survival after the explosions, and the decades of living with what they left behind. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.